The quantum communication array hummed with an intensity that made the hair on Captain Jack Morrison's neck stand on end. He'd spent 37 years in various branches of international space defense, and nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this moment. The Zorn mothership hung in space like a massive obsidian blade, its form so alien that human telescopes initially struggled to process its geometry. It wasn't just large. It was a mathematical impossibility made real, with hull surfaces that seemed to bend light around them in ways that defied standard physics. Major Emily Rodriguez stood beside Morrison, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that looked more like an artist's canvas than a communication system. She was a third-generation space defense specialist, her mother having worked on the first deep space early warning systems, her grandmother a pioneer in quantum communication technologies. "Incoming transmission," she announced, her voice steady. "They're using a communication protocol that's simultaneously visual, auditory, and quantum encoded. Fascinating." Morrison knew fascinating was Rodriguez's professional understatement. What she meant was that the alien communication was so complex it would have been incomprehensible to human scientists just 2 decades ago. The main screen flickered to life. What appeared was not a singular entity, but a collective representation, a shimmering holographic construct that seemed to be simultaneously multiple beings and a single consciousness. The Zorn Imperium's diplomatic projection was designed to be intimidating. A swirling mass of geometric patterns that suggested collective intelligence far beyond individual thought. Inhabitants of planetary designation Earth Sol 3. The transmission began, its voice a multilayered resonance that seemed to bypass ears and communicate directly with the brain. "We are the Zorn Imperium. Your technological development has been monitored. Your species has been evaluated. Prepare for assimilation and protectorate status." Morrison's hand unconsciously moved to a hidden communication device. To any outside observer, it would look like a simple gesture. To the specialized teams monitoring the encounter, it was a pre-arranged signal. Rodriguez was already ahead of him. While the Zorn transmission continued its bureaucratic declaration of dominance, she was running a simultaneous translation, cultural analysis, and quantum-level communication assessment. Hidden quantum entanglement relays, developed in secret research facilities from Beijing to Boston, were already mapping every nuance of the alien communication. What the Zorn didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades. Not out of fear, but out of a fundamental understanding that space was not just a frontier, but a complex ecosystem of potential encounters. The response was crafted not just by diplomats, but by a team that included xenolinguists, quantum physicists, game theory experts, and cultural anthropologists. Every word, every signal, was a carefully constructed message that said, "We are not what you expect." Zorn Imperium. Rodriguez's response began, "We acknowledge your communication. We invite further dialogue under mutual terms of respect and scientific exchange." Simple words, but each was a precisely tuned instrument. The quantum communication array recorded the Zorn's momentary hesitation, a microsecond of confusion that would have been imperceptible to any other species. They had encountered countless civilizations. Submission or resistance were typical responses. This was something else. In underground facilities across multiple continents, teams of specialists watched, analyzed, and prepared. The Space Defense Station where Morrison and Rodriguez stood was just the visible tip of a massive global preparation. Unbeknownst to the Zorn, humanity had been listening to the cosmic background, analyzing potential alien communication methods, and preparing contingency plans for over half a century. First contact was not a moment of surprise, but a carefully choreographed dance. The Zorn transmission continued, its multilayered communication suggesting multiple potential interaction scenarios. Each was a test, a probing of human psychological and technological capabilities. They would soon learn that humanity was not a species to be tested. Humanity was the test. The Zorn Imperium's primary psychological warfare unit was a marvel of collective intelligence, composed of 9 interconnected neural networks that had successfully subjugated or neutralized 417 different species across 3 galactic sectors. They approached the human communication challenge with cold, calculated confidence. Dr. Michael Thompson leaned back in his chair, a holographic display dancing with complex linguistic and psychological algorithms surrounding him. The underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains was a testament to human preparation, a nerve center that looked more like an impossible fusion of art gallery and supercomputing hub. They're using a communication model that's simultaneously a threat, an assessment, and a negotiation, Thompson muttered to his lead analyst, Dr. Arya Patel. Her fingers were a blur across multiple quantum interfaces, each movement parsing layers of alien communication that would have driven most minds to complete breakdown. The Zorn's psychological approach was designed to be overwhelming. Their communication was a multi-dimensional assault intended to induce a specific cascade of emotional and rational responses. Most species they'd encountered would have either submitted immediately or responded with predictable defensive mechanisms. Humans, however, were anything but predictable. Thompson's team had spent decades studying conflict psychology, game theory, cultural adaptation, and communication strategies from every conceivable angle. They'd analyzed historical human conflicts, from tribal warfare to global diplomatic negotiations, creating predictive models that went far beyond traditional psychological assessment. The current transmission from the Zorn was a masterpiece of intimidation. It layered multiple communication vectors, subsonic frequencies that triggered primal fear responses, visual patterns designed to induce cognitive dissonance, and linguistic constructs that suggested both absolute superiority and potential mercy. To any other species, it would have been unbearable. To the humans monitoring the transmission, it was a fascinating puzzle. They're using what appears to be a hierarchical intimidation protocol, Patel observed, her voice calm. Notice how the communication structure suggests multiple levels of potential submission. Each layer is designed to create a specific psychological pressure point. Thompson nodded. The Zorn believed they were presenting an unassailable communication strategy. What they didn't realize was that humans had been playing psychological chess for millennia. The response was crafted not by a single individual, but by a distributed network of experts. Linguists who understood the nuanced psychology of language, game theorists who could predict complex interaction models, anthropologists who comprehended the deep cultural mechanisms of human adaptation. Their counter-communication was a work of art. It acknowledged the Zorn's transmission while simultaneously subverting every expected response pattern. Where the alien communication sought to create a sense of overwhelming power, the human response introduced elements of curiosity, collaborative potential, and most terrifyingly to the Zorn, genuine interest. "We appreciate the complexity of your communication," the human response began, a phrase that would be analyzed by Zorn psychologists for decades to come. It was simultaneously a diplomatic acknowledgement, a subtle challenge, and an invitation. In the underground facility, Thompson watched the Zorn's reaction with scientific detachment. The alien communication network, a collective intelligence that had never experienced true individual thinking, suddenly displayed something unprecedented: confusion. Humans had introduced an element the Zorn communication matrix couldn't process: genuine unpredictability. The psychological warfare team realized something fundamental about humanity that no previous encounter had revealed. Humans didn't just adapt to psychological pressure, they transformed it. Where other species would break, humans would redesign the entire interaction framework. Each layer of the human response was carefully constructed. The linguistic patterns suggested openness while maintaining absolute clarity about human sovereignty. The communication tone balanced respect with an unmistakable sense of equal footing. The Zorn had approached this encounter expecting to map and manipulate. They were beginning to understand they were the ones being mapped. "They're trying to understand us," Dr. Patel said softly, a hint of amusement in her voice. "But they have no framework for what they're encountering." Thompson allowed himself a slight smile. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to be fundamentally, beautifully unexpected. The psychological chess match had only just begun. The fragment of alien technology was barely the size of a human thumb, yet it represented more computational power than the entire Earth possessed just 15 years ago. Alex Bennett turned the quantum crystalline device over in his hand, his eyes reflecting a matrix of holographic data streams that danced around the research facility. "We're not just reverse engineering," Bennett muttered to his lead engineer, Dr. Kimberly Rodriguez. "We're completely reimagining the fundamental principles of computation." The secret research facility in Silicon Valley looked nothing like the sterile laboratories most would imagine. It was a controlled chaos of creativity. Workstations that seemed to blur the line between art installation and cutting-edge technological workshop. Engineers, physicists, material scientists, and quantum theorists worked in a synchronized dance that defied traditional research methodologies. When the first alien communication fragments had been analyzed, most scientific teams would have spent months, if not years, attempting to understand the basic principles. The International Research Consortium took less than 72 hours to begin fundamental deconstruction. The Zorn had transmitted what they believed was an incomprehensible technological signature, a communication protocol so advanced that it should have been indecipherable to a primitive species like humans. What they didn't understand was that humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to look at the impossible and see opportunity. Bennett's team had already identified 3 fundamental breakthrough technologies within the first fragment: a quantum communication method that rendered current human encryption technologies look like children's secret codes, a material science breakthrough that suggested entire new approaches to energy transmission, and a computational logic system that made traditional binary computing look like an abacus. "Look at this," Rodriguez said, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "The communication protocol isn't just a method of transmission. It's a living, adaptive system. Each transmission modifies its own fundamental structure." What the Zorn saw as a demonstration of technological superiority, humans saw as an interesting engineering challenge. Global research facilities were no longer working in competition, but in a level of cooperation that would have been unimaginable just decades earlier. The alien technological fragment became a global project. Universities in Beijing, research centers in Bangalore, tech labs in Silicon Valley, innovation hubs in Tel Aviv, all working with a level of synchronized effort that defied traditional international dynamics. Within a week, the first human-developed quantum communication prototype emerged. It wasn't a copy of the alien technology. It was something entirely new. A technological approach that took the alien principles and transformed them through a distinctly human lens of innovation. The Zorn monitoring systems registered something unprecedented, not just technological adaptation, but a complete reimagining of the technological paradigm. "They're not just learning," one of the collective Zorn analysts noted, a hint of what might have been fear entering its multilayered communication. "They're evolving the technology in real time." Bennett understood something fundamental about human innovation that the Zorn could not comprehend. Technology wasn't just a tool. It was a language of possibility. The research facility became a crucible of human potential. Material scientists discovered that by slightly modifying the quantum crystalline structure, they could develop energy storage methods that made current battery technologies look like ancient relics. Quantum physicists found communication pathways that suggested entirely new approaches to understanding spatial relationships. What the Zorn had transmitted as a show of technological superiority was becoming humanity's newest platform for innovation. "We're not just catching up," Bennett told Rodriguez as they reviewed the latest prototype. "We're leapfrogging entire technological generations." The alien technology fragment had been intended as a display of power. Instead, it had become the key that would unlock humanity's next evolutionary step in technological development. By the end of the first month, human-developed technologies had not just reverse-engineered the alien communication protocols, they had fundamentally reimagined them. Where the Zorn saw technological transmission, Humans saw an invitation to explore the very boundaries of what technology could represent. The technological revolution had begun, and humanity was just getting started. The transmission arrived simultaneously to every major government, media outlet, scientific institution, and communication network on Earth. It was a calculated assault designed to shatter human psychological defenses, a comprehensive data package revealing Earth's most critical vulnerabilities. Sarah Williams sat in the United Nations Emergency Coordination Center, her fingers tracing the holographic displays that mapped global reactions in real time. She was the UN's Special Advisor on Species-Level Crisis Management, a role that had evolved from theoretical nightmare to immediate reality. The Zorn had compiled a devastating dossier, climate change projections showing potential civilization-ending scenarios, resource scarcity models that suggested imminent global collapse, geopolitical conflict analyses highlighting humanity's historical tendency for self-destruction, ecological breakdown predictions, economic instability forecasts, technological vulnerability assessments. It was a package designed to induce global panic. Instead, something entirely unexpected happened. Across the planet, instead of fragmentation, humanity experienced a near-instantaneous collective response. Social media platforms, typically breeding grounds for division, transformed into global problem-solving networks. Universities suspended traditional competitive research models and began sharing resources. Corporations set aside profit margins and redirected entire research and production capabilities toward shared challenges. "They're trying to show us our weaknesses," Williams muttered to her chief analyst, Marcus Rodriguez, "but they don't understand what they're looking at." The Zorn communication was a multilayered psychological weapon. Each data point was carefully constructed to trigger specific emotional and societal breakdown mechanisms. They had used similar strategies to destabilize 417 different civilizations across multiple galactic sectors. Humanity responded by doing something completely unprecedented. Within hours, a global collaborative framework emerged. Nations that had been historical enemies began sharing critical research. Tech companies opened source technologies that would have been worth billions. Scientific institutions created a real-time, planet-wide knowledge exchange that made the internet look like a child's communication tool. The climate change projections that were meant to induce despair became a global mobilization effort. Instead of arguing about the problem, humanity began implementing solutions at a scale that defied conventional understanding. Renewable energy projects that would have taken decades were fast-tracked in months. Geoengineering initiatives that previously seemed like science fiction became coordinated global efforts. Agricultural technologies were rapidly developed to address potential food scarcity. Water management systems were redesigned from the ground up. Marcus Rodriguez pulled up a global coordination map. "Look at this," he said to Williams. "We're not just responding. We're transforming." The Zorn had expected division. They had prepared for the typical human patterns of conflict, selfishness, and short-term thinking. Instead, they witnessed a species-level adaptive response that went beyond any known societal transformation model. Social media became more than a communication platform. It transformed into a real-time, global problem-solving network. Where the Zorn expected misinformation and chaos, they found structured, collaborative intelligence. Individual human voices didn't compete. They contributed to a collective understanding. Educational systems globally shifted. Universities suspended traditional semester structures to focus on solving the challenges presented in the alien transmission. Students from different disciplines began working on interdisciplinary solutions that broke down every conventional academic boundary. What the Zorn saw as a weakness, humanity's diverse cultural backgrounds, became the civilization's greatest strength. Each cultural perspective offered a unique approach to the challenges. Indigenous knowledge systems provided ecological insights. Eastern philosophical approaches offered systemic thinking. Western technological innovation provided implementation strategies. "They're trying to show us our fractures," Williams said, watching the global response unfold. "But they're revealing our true nature." By the end of the first week, Humanity had not just addressed the vulnerabilities, they had begun reimagining entire systems of civilization. The transmission intended to induce panic had become a global blueprint for transformation. The Zorn monitoring systems registered something they had never encountered before. This wasn't resistance. This wasn't adaptation. This was evolution in real time. And humanity was just getting started. The genetic sequencing lab resembled something between a cathedral of science and an artist's most impossible dream. Holographic DNA strands twisted and danced around Dr. Robert Chen, their complex structures revealing layers of complexity that defied everything the Zorn understood about biological systems. "It's not just adaptive," Chen muttered to his colleague Dr. Elena Vasquez. "It's sentient at a cellular level." The Zorn had sent biological analysis teams to study human physiology, expecting to find a relatively simple carbon-based life form. What they discovered was a living system so complex, so fundamentally different from any known galactic biological model, that their entire understanding of life itself began to unravel. Human DNA wasn't just a genetic code. It was a living, responsive ecosystem. Where most species in the galaxy had reached genetic stasis, their evolutionary potential essentially locked after millennia of technological intervention. Humans represented something entirely unprecedented. Each human cell contained what could only be described as an adaptive intelligence. Environmental challenges weren't just survived. They were actively processed, integrated, and transformed. The radiation exposure study became the first indicator of something truly extraordinary. Zorn scientists had exposed human cell cultures to levels of radiation that should have caused complete genetic breakdown. Instead, the cells began a process of rapid adaptation that looked more like intelligent redesign than simple survival. Stem cell research revealed capabilities that bordered on the miraculous. Human cells could not just regenerate, they could completely reimagine their functional purpose. A skin cell, under specific stress conditions, could potentially restructure itself to perform neurological functions. Immune responses weren't just defensive, they were proactively creative. "Look at this," Vask said, her fingers tracing a holographic representation of human cellular response. "It's like each cell is running its own complex problem-solving algorithm." The Zorn Biological Assessment Team had documented 417 different species across their explored galaxies. Each had its own remarkable adaptations, but none, absolutely none, had ever shown the kind of fundamental biological plasticity that humans demonstrated. Human genetic potential seemed to have no discernible limit. Existing genetic modifications that had become standard in most advanced civilizations, technological interventions designed to eliminate diseases, extend lifespans, enhance cognitive capabilities, were almost primitive compared to the human biological system. Where other species required technological intervention, humans possessed an internal mechanism of continuous evolutionary adjustment. Even more fascinating was the psychological component of human biological adaptation. Stress responses, contrary to traditional biological models, didn't just trigger defensive mechanisms. They initiated complex reevaluation and potential restructuring of cellular function. The most shocking discovery came from studying human response to environmental challenges. Where most species would require generations to develop genetic adaptations, humans showed potential for rapid, individual-level genetic modification. Exposure to high-altitude environments didn't just trigger standard physiological responses. Human DNA would begin restructuring oxygen processing mechanisms within a single generation. Dietary changes could initiate complex metabolic reprogramming that would take most species thousands of years of evolutionary pressure. They're not just a species, one Zorn biological researcher noted in a classified report. They're a living, continuous evolutionary experiment. The implications were staggering. Human biological systems suggested a level of adaptive potential that went beyond traditional understanding of life itself. Each human wasn't just an individual. They were a complex, adaptive ecosystem capable of continuous reinvention. Genetic markers showed healing capabilities that defied medical understanding. Neurological plasticity that suggested the brain was less an organ and more a continuously evolving computational system. Immune responses that didn't just defend against threats, but actively learned and developed new defense mechanisms in real time. Dr. Chen looked at the holographic representation of human genetic potential and saw something the Zorn could not comprehend. This wasn't just biology. This was a living, breathing manifestation of potential itself. We're not just adapting, Chen said softly. We're becoming. The Zorn Biological Assessment Team would spend decades trying to understand what they had discovered, but they would never fully comprehend the fundamental truth about human biology. Humanity wasn't a fixed state. It was a continuous process of becoming. The first wave of Zorn attack ships descended on Earth like a nightmare made of obsidian and quantum energy. Colonel Jessica Martinez watched from the underground command center, her tactical display a symphony of impossible complexity. The Zorn military strategists believed they were launching a textbook invasion. Their computational models had predicted total planetary subjugation within 72 hours. They had conquered 417 different civilizations, using strategies that had become almost ritualistic in their precision. They had no idea what was coming. Human military doctrine had been completely reimagined in the decades leading up to first contact. It was no longer about overwhelming force or traditional battlefield mechanics. It was about turning the entire concept of warfare into a multi-dimensional chess game where the board itself was constantly changing. Drone Swarm Alpha, deploy, Martinez commanded, her voice calm. What the Zorn saw as a defensive position was actually an intricate trap. Thousands of autonomous drones, each one a miniature marvel of adaptive AI and quantum communication technology, began to move. They weren't just weapons. They were a living, thinking network that could reconfigure itself faster than any alien computational system could predict. The first alien strike groups found themselves navigating through a battlefield that wasn't just defended, it was alive. Quantum communication relays meant that every drone was simultaneously a sensor, a weapon, and a communication node. They moved with a collective intelligence that defied traditional understanding of military engagement. They're using a completely non-linear combat strategy, muttered Captain David Chen, analyzing the tactical displays. It's like the entire planetary defense is one massive adaptive organism. The Zorn had specific attack protocols for planetary invasion. Neutralize communication networks, disable primary military installations, create psychological pressure through overwhelming force. These strategies had worked 417 times before. Humanity broke every single one of those protocols. Communication networks didn't go down. They transformed. Military installations weren't destroyed. They became more complex. Psychological pressure didn't create submission. It triggered a global, instantaneous resistance mechanism. Civilian infrastructure became a weapon. Every communication tower, every satellite, every piece of technological infrastructure was simultaneously a defensive node and an offensive capability. Cities weren't just defended. They became living, adaptive combat systems. Look at this, Chen said, pointing to a tactical display that looked more like a living ecosystem than a traditional battle map. They're not just responding. They're anticipating. Drone swarms would suddenly reconfigure themselves, creating computational interference patterns that made alien targeting systems essentially useless. Satellite networks would shift quantum communication frequencies faster than the Zorn could adapt. Defensive systems weren't just reactive, they were predictive. The psychological warfare component was equally devastating. Human combat units didn't just fight, they communicated. Every engagement was simultaneously a military action and a complex information exchange. Defeated units would transmit detailed tactical information that would be instantly integrated into the global defense network. What the Zorn saw as individual combat units, humans saw as distributed neural networks. Traditional alien invasion models assumed linear progression. Neutralize this sector, Destroy that installation. Create psychological pressure. Humanity's response was a continuous adaptive ecosystem of resistance. Civilian technological infrastructure became a weapon. Power grids could be instantly reconfigured into massive electromagnetic interference systems. Communication networks became computational warfare platforms. Every piece of technology was a potential defensive mechanism. They're treating the entire planet like a single adaptive combat organism. One Zorn military strategist noted, a hint of what might have been fear entering its multilayered communication. Martinez allowed herself a slight smile. The invasion wasn't just being repelled. It was being studied, analyzed, and turned into an opportunity for technological and strategic innovation. By the end of the first week, the Zorn attack groups found themselves in a situation they had never encountered. They weren't just failing to conquer a planet. They were being comprehensively analyzed, their own technologies and strategies being turned against them in real time. Warfare, for humanity, was no longer about destruction. It was about transformation. And the Zorn were about to learn that the hard way. The diplomatic chamber was unlike anything the Zorn had ever encountered. It wasn't a traditional meeting space, but a dynamic environment that seemed to breathe with possibility. Ambassador Thomas Reynolds stood at the center, surrounded by a holographic representation of human history, culture, and potential. This wasn't just a negotiation. It was a profound philosophical engagement that would redefine the understanding of intelligent life in the galaxy. The Zorn collective consciousness, a multilayered intelligence that had systematically categorized and often subjugated 417 different civilizations, found itself confronting something entirely unprecedented. Humanity wasn't seeking galactic dominance. They weren't looking to conquer or be conquered. They were presenting something far more dangerous, a fundamental reimagining of existence itself. "You've studied our vulnerabilities," Reynolds began, his voice calm and measured, "but you fundamentally misunderstood our nature." The holographic display around him began to shift. Millennia of human history unfolded, not as a linear progression of conflicts and conquests, but as a complex, interconnected narrative of continuous adaptation. The Zorn watched as images of scientific discovery, artistic innovation, philosophical breakthroughs, and cultural transformations danced around Reynolds. Where the Zorn saw weakness, humans saw opportunity. Where other species would have fractured under the pressures of technological advancement, environmental challenges, and internal conflicts, humanity had transformed those very challenges into mechanisms of growth. The diplomatic transmission was simultaneously a historical analysis, a philosophical treatise, and a declaration of potential. "We do not seek to replace your galactic order," Reynolds continued. "We seek to expand it, to challenge it, to reimagine what intelligent life can be." The Zorn Collective had approached this encounter expecting to categorize, to assess, to potentially subjugate. Instead, they found themselves being categorized, assessed, and challenged. Each moment of human history presented in the holographic display was a testament to a fundamental truth the Zorn could barely comprehend. Humanity's greatest strength was not its technological capabilities, its biological adaptability, or its military potential. It was hope. Not a naive, passive hope, but hope as an active, transformative force. A commitment to possibility that transformed every challenge into an opportunity for growth. The images shifted, scientific discoveries that emerged from periods of profound global challenge. Technological innovations born from seemingly insurmountable limitations. Cultural transformations that rewrote fundamental understanding of social organization. Reynolds wasn't just presenting a case for humanity's inclusion in the galactic community. He was presenting a fundamental challenge to the very concept of galactic civilization. "Your approach to existence is static," he explained. "You categorize. You manage. You control. We evolve. We transform. We see potential where you see boundaries." The Zorn collective processing systems began to experience something unprecedented. Not just data analysis, but a form of philosophical recalibration that challenged their fundamental understanding of intelligent life. Humanity wasn't seeking to be understood. They were offering a new framework of understanding. The holographic display began to show potential futures, not predictions, but possibilities. Collaborative scientific research that could transform multiple species' understanding of the universe. Technological innovations that could address challenges faced by countless civilizations. Cultural exchange mechanisms that went beyond simple communication. "We are not asking to join your civilization," Reynolds said, his final statement a philosophical thunderbolt. "We are offering to help reimagine what civilization can be." The Zorn Collective found itself confronting a profound truth. Humanity was not a species to be conquered or categorized. They were a fundamental force of potential, a living, breathing invitation to continuous transformation. The diplomatic transmission ended, but the philosophical confrontation was just beginning. Humanity had done more than defend itself against invasion. It had challenged the very foundations of galactic understanding. The chamber where the final negotiations took place was neither human nor Zorn design. It was a new kind of space altogether. A testament to the very philosophy humanity had been arguing for, a collaborative creation that defied previous limitations. Captain Jack Morrison and Major Emily Rodriguez stood as part of the human delegation, watching as the fundamental structure of galactic civilization began to reshape itself before their eyes. The Zorn Imperium had not surrendered. They had something far more profound happening. They were evolving. 12 standard galactic cycles of continuous dialogue, technological exchange, and philosophical confrontation had led to this moment. What began as a potential invasion had transformed into the most significant evolutionary moment in galactic history. The holographic displays around the chamber showed more than diplomatic proceedings. They illustrated the systematic dismantling of existing galactic structures and the collaborative construction of something entirely new. "We're not just joining your civilization," Ambassador Thomas Reynolds said, his words echoing through quantum communication channels that spanned multiple star systems. "We're reimagining what civilization can be." The transformation was comprehensive. Existing galactic governance models, hierarchical systems that had remained unchanged for millennia, were being completely redesigned. Where the Zorn had previously maintained control through strategic subjugation and technological limitation, humanity introduced concepts of collaborative development, open-source innovation, and collective potential. Scientific research protocols changed. Where previous interspecies research was tightly controlled and limited, new frameworks emerged that allowed for unprecedented levels of collaboration. Human approaches to problem-solving, which emphasized creativity, interdisciplinary thinking, and continuous adaptation, became the new standard. Technological development accelerated beyond anything the galaxy had previously experienced. Human innovation wasn't just about creating new technologies. It was about creating systems that could continuously reinvent themselves. The biological research divisions were particularly transformed. Human understanding of adaptive potential began to reshape how different species approached their own evolutionary trajectories. What the Zorn had seen as fixed biological limitations were now understood as opportunities for continuous growth. Dr. Robert Chen presented groundbreaking research that showed how different species could learn from humanity's adaptive biological models. It wasn't about creating a uniform standard, but about understanding the fundamental potential for continuous transformation. Diplomatic communication protocols were completely reimagined. Where previous systems relied on rigid hierarchical structures, new models emerged that emphasized fluid, adaptive communication mechanisms. Human psychological approaches, which valued individual perspective while maintaining collective goals, became the new standard. "This isn't conquest," Reynolds continued. "This is collaboration." The Zorn leadership, which was no longer a singular, static entity, but a dynamic, evolving collective, began to understand a fundamental truth about humanity. They weren't seeking to replace existing systems. They were offering a new way of existing. Technological exchange platforms emerged that went beyond simple information sharing. They became living, adaptive networks where innovation could happen instantaneously across multiple species and star systems. Human quantum communication technologies, combined with their unique approach to collaborative innovation, created platforms that made previous communication systems look primitive. Educational systems across multiple species were transformed. Learning was no longer about memorization and hierarchical knowledge transfer. It became a dynamic, continuous process of exploration and potential. Space exploration initiatives were reimagined. Where previous models focused on territorial expansion and resource extraction, new frameworks emerged that emphasized scientific discovery, cultural exchange, and collective understanding. Dr. Michael Thompson's psychological research teams developed communication and collaboration models that allowed different species to genuinely understand each other's perspectives, moving beyond translation into true empathetic exchange. As the negotiations concluded, it became clear that something profound had occurred. This wasn't a human victory over the Zorn. This was a fundamental transformation of what intelligent life could represent. The final diplomatic document wasn't a treaty. It was an invitation to continuous growth, to perpetual possibility, to a way of existing that saw limitations as opportunities. Captain Morrison looked at Rodriguez, a slight smile crossing his face. They both understood something fundamental. This was never about conquering the galaxy. It was about inviting the galaxy to reimagine itself. The Zorn's original classification of humanity would remain legendary. In their most critical report, a single line stood out. Humans are not a species. They are a force of continuous becoming.